You have to ask yourself, am I also susceptible to cult behavior and cult thinking? And the fact is that you are, and I am. So the best line of defense that we have is to understand how to spot a cult. How do we actually identify one? What are the hallmarks of a cult so that I can see them plainly for what they are and choose not to participate? So in this video, I'm going to go over the 9 hallmarks of a cult, and I'm going to talk about a couple of examples from history, from cults that have happened previously or are currently happening now. And then ultimately, I'm going to talk about how we can protect ourselves from recruitment. How can we keep ourselves safe from joining one of these groups that offer some things that actually our human nature wants, but we have to be willing to resist them if we're going to keep ourselves safe and preserve the freedom of thought. By the way, my name's Chad. I'm dedicated to freedom of thought. So let's dive in. The first hallmark of a cult is a charismatic leader. Cults always follow a charismatic leader. This is somebody, they could be living or dead, but the teachings, their ideas, they are above all other understanding. They are capital T truth. Typically, these people are considered a genius on one end of the scale, so it could be intellectual. On the other end of the scale, intellectual or business acumen or some sort of genius. On the other end of the scale, they consider themselves a prophet that speaks directly to God, or even Jesus Christ reincarnated, or God themselves. Often they can't be questioned, and the fellowship, the followers of the cult see it as their duty to protect the reputation of the leader and to protect them from any criticism. So one of the examples, and look, you could look at any cult that has ever been discovered and find the leader. But the example that I'll use is this one here. This is Jim Jones. He started the People's Temple. Over a course of the time that the cult existed, he moved the membership many times to different locations, Northern California, and then ultimately ending up in Guyana, moving the followers all the way to Guyana because of the insight that he had around racism and fascism and the future of the country. A former member, Tim Carter, said the temple moved to Jonestown because in '74, what we saw in the United States was creeping fascism. The followers believed that Jim Jones had some sort of insight into where the country was going and they needed to flee. But ultimately, if you know the story, this is where over 900 people took their own lives under his direction. Now, how do we protect ourselves from this? Ask a lot of questions. Don't just take leaders for their word. Don't just take leaders for what they say they can offer you, like salvation or alleviating certain pains or struggles. Make sure you're asking a ton of questions all of the time and paying close attention to not only the answers, but how people answer or don't answer. And if you're shunned or shamed for asking these questions, get the hell out. So the second hallmark goes hand in hand with the charismatic leader, and that's ideological purity. Very simply put, ideological purity is where you can't question any of the tenets or principles or doctrine of the cult. And when you do, you're met with both shame and punishment. So as you start asking really good questions, people get really uncomfortable, and then they put the blame and shame back on you so that it's all your problem. It's not the problem with the leader or the doctrine or the followers. You are the problem. And so you feel shame for that. A classic example of this is Scientology and Ron L. Hubbard. There's a principle in Scientology called a suppressive person. This is a title for somebody who questions the tenets and principles of the religion. So whether they're in Scientology or out of Scientology, if you're asking questions about why, really good logical questions about some of the interesting things that they teach or really weird or very damaging things that they teach, you get labeled a suppressive person. And that's to separate you or whoever it is from the fellowship. And ultimately, they're taught to shun those people, to block them out. So if you're a member and you start asking questions, you get labeled a suppressive person. And now you're on the outside. Nobody talks to you until you re-fellowship yourself and pledge your allegiance to the principles that are there. If you're not a member, if you're a family member or somebody who cares about the person that's in the organization and you get labeled a suppressive person, they will shun you. Cut off those ties because you're questioning what it is they're using to control you. How do you protect yourself from this is the same as the charismatic leader. Ask lots of questions. Point out inconsistencies and pay close attention to how people respond to them, how they interact with them. Does it seem like your questions are a threat? And if your questions are a threat, ask yourself, why would asking this question about an inconsistency show up as a threat for these people? And know that ultimately, if it's a place that you can't ask good questions, it's not a place that wants the best for you and a place that wants you to think for yourself. So the third hallmark goes right in hand with charismatic leader and ideological purity, and that is conformity and control. All cults have some sort of mechanism of control. They want to control where you work. They want to control how you spend your money, the food that you eat. They want to control very personal aspects of your life, like your sexual behavior. More on that in just a minute. And next level conformity and control is getting members of the cult to police each other and to tell on each other and to be in each other's business and know everything about each other so that we can control the actions. An example of this is the 90s cult Heaven's Gate, led by Marshall Applewhite. Members had to check in and check out at the house whenever they left. So if they had jobs or some errand that they needed to run, go shopping, they had to sign a logbook when they left and how much money they left with, and then how much money they came back with and when they got back. They also had a very specific diet. They tried a lot of different diets, but you had to be on the diet that everybody else was partaking. So they controlled your money, they controlled your time, they controlled the food that you ate. Ultimately, when things really started unraveling, they controlled sexuality by actually having male members of the cult castrate themselves. We know that this cult also unfortunately ended in a mass suicide where everybody drank poison in the house and thought that because they were leaving their physical bodies, they were able to get on a UFO behind the Hellbop comet. I'm going to talk more about that in another hallmark. But ultimately, they look to control every aspect of your life that they can so that you have a dependency on them. How to protect yourself from this is to keep some information private from any group that you're a member of. No group that has your best interest in mind needs to know every detail about your life. And they certainly don't need to control most or have a say in most aspects of your life. So if you want to find the best way to feed your body, what you eat, get that from one source. If you want to find the most healthy way to interact sexually, get that from another source. Diversify the sources of information in your life so that you know you can seek the best, because not one source is going to have the best of all of those. And keep that information siloed as well, because information is power and power can easily turn into control. The fourth hallmark of a cult is mind-altering practices. So this can look like sleep deprivation, chanting, meditation, and on the extremes, drugs, required drug use. An example of this is the Manson family. Charles Manson, of course, was the leader of the cult, the Manson family, and one of the early practices that he implemented early in the belief system was the use of psychedelic and amphetamines. And this put people in an altered state so that he can play with their thoughts and plant seeds of belief into things that were not real. So one way to protect yourself from this is if you want to continue to be a part of a group that uses these tactics like, mind-altering practices like chanting and meditation and sleep deprivation, or really drugs, try attending one of the functions and don't use it. Refuse to use it and see what the reaction is. If they tell you in order to be a member of this thing, you have to do this thing, you have to meditate, you have to do this chant, or you have to use this drug, get the hell out. That's an indicator to you that they're not interested in you contributing to the group or you being a part of something meaningful. It's an indicator that they need you to do the thing that they're using to exercise control over you. Number 5 is isolation. Cults work to isolate you from your social structures. They want you to work in places that they can control. They want you to socialize in places that they can control. They want you to depend on the group for everything socially that you need. And this includes separating you from your family and friends who are not a part of the cult. One of the current cults that's happening right now is the Shekinah cult, led by a man by the name of Robert Schein. And he created a doctrine that said, in order to save your family, like you can actually save your family to get them to heaven, to save them from their sins, but you have to disconnect from them and work on yourself. Like get yourself in a place where you can get salvation, and in so doing, then you could go help your family do it. But the key to that was you needed to separate yourself from them for a time, an undetermined time, in order for you to properly work on yourself without their influence, and then you could go help them. The problem is that the cult keeps people stuck in a state of not being saved, so that never comes the time where then they now go connect with their family to help them be saved. So this is a unique story around isolation that is very, very clever, because the people love their families and they don't want to separate from them, and they believe they're doing the best for their family by separating from them. The way you protect yourself from this is keeping social circles in lots of different contexts. Have good relationships at work, good relationships in your hobbies, good relationship in your religion or your church and in your community and your neighborhood, and preserve those relationships in lots of contexts so that you can have a well-rounded experience and stay grounded in what's around you. Another hallmark of a really effective cult is the us versus them mentality. This is where cult members are often encouraged to believe that they're superior in some way to everybody else, whether that's in the information that they have, the understanding that they have, or some sort of salvation locked in, or some information. So an example of this is David Koresh, and he led a cult called the Branch Davidians. Most people would recognize this as the cult in Waco, Texas. He effectively used the us versus them principle to convince his followers that they were superior to everybody else because they were the only ones that understood some of the prophecies in the Bible and how they were going to come about. And therefore, they needed to stay isolated from the rest of the world so that the world's ideas would not infiltrate their pure understanding of those philosophy or those prophecies in the Bible. This ultimately led to them sticking with him to the very, very end as their compound was infiltrated. And they were loyal to him to death, basically, because he believed he had the only truth, and it was an us versus them mentality. So how do we protect ourselves from this? Very similar to other things that I've talked about, diversity of thought. Understand that the truth, capital T truth, doesn't come from a single source. Look to as many different sources as you can possibly find, and then be honest with yourself of whether or not they're consistent. And find the consistencies that are in order to find some semblance of the truth. Secondly, don't buy the my team fallacy. My team fallacy plays on a evolutionary innate desire as a human being to belong, to find your tribe and then belong to them. All we really want, most of our goals in life, most of the things we're working towards, is to belong in a group. And cult leaders understand this. And so they create a team, they create a tribe. And then you have to buy everything in that tribe, all the doctrines, all the beliefs, all the practices, in order to belong and not be rejected. But ultimately, being rejected by a group could be one of the best things ever, especially if it's going to mean life or death later on. The second hallmark of a cult is sexual abuse. As unpleasant as it is to talk about and think about, almost every single one ends up with some sort of abuse in this realm. An example of this is Keith Raniere and the Nexium cult. The details are tough to talk about, but ultimately, as the cult went on, as time went on, he required most of the women that were close to him to have sexual relationships with him. He was abusive and he was manipulative, and culminated to him actually branding those women with his initials. This is a devastating example of the sexual abuse that cult leaders exercise when they can build enough trust and they get you into the core of the cult. How can you protect yourself from this one? This one is really, really tricky because usually this abuse doesn't start until well within your time at the cult. So its time has passed, trust has built, and then the leaders introduce some of this abuse. So this one's a lot harder to protect yourself from. And one is follow your gut. If something seems off, it might be, and you should get out of there. Also, don't believe the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy says, well, I've put so much money, energy, and time into this thing that if I were to walk away now, all of that cost, everything that I've paid up until now would be wasted. And that's just not the truth. When things like this happen, you have to be willing to walk away from everything that you've invested in order to save yourself from this abuse. All right, the 8th hallmark of a cult is apocalyptic thinking. And this is preparation for a supposed apocalypse or some cataclysmic event. One really strong example of this is the Heaven's Gate cult that happened in the 90s in San Diego. I mean, they moved around a lot, but ultimately ended up in San Diego. And the teachings were is that God was going to come get them on a UFO. And then all of a sudden this comet appeared that they thought they saw a UFO in the trailing of the comet. And so they needed to take their own lives in order to get on the UFO and be saved. Right here it says the Heaven's Gate cult believed that a flying saucer was traveling behind the Hale-Bopp comet. They chose to leave their physical bodies behind to find redemption in an extraterrestrial kingdom of heaven. The sect also left behind apocalyptic messages in their Rancho Santa Fe mansion and on their home page on the World Wide Web. This is what's crazy about this one. Get this. Heaven's Gate website is still live. You can go visit it today, and their message, whether Hale-Bopp has a companion or not, is irrelevant from the perspective. However, its arrival is joyously very significant to us. And Heaven's Gate. So it's crazy. You can visit this. If you go to heavensgate.com right now, their website is still live, even though that most of them, there are still a few members that are out there. Most of them took their own lives to get on the UFO that was following the comet. So how do you protect yourself from this? Well, lots of cult leaders actually set dates for the apocalyptic event and it never happens. And then they keep setting dates and keep setting dates. This could be a first and very clear clue that this is not somewhere that you want to be. And the apocalyptic thinking and the threat instills fear in you, and then the fear will get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. So actually, fear is the second most effective tool in creating control. As much as you possibly can, resist the urge to buy into the fear, because naturally, innately, you want to buy into fear. Human nature is, because we don't want something bad in the future to happen to us. But we have to be willing to resist the urge, the fear, in order to see the validity of the claims of the apocalyptic event. So the 9th and final hallmark of a cult is time and energy. Followers are expected to dedicate huge amounts of time, energy, focus, and money, if not all of it, to the cult. And it's positioned as, if you do this, we will take care of you. We will take care of you now, and we will take care of you in the future, meaning you'll go to heaven, or you'll get this reward, or you'll become popular, or you'll have this celebrity. You know, there's lots of things that they can promise, but they want you to give most things, if not everything, to them so that they can take care of you. It's the promise of safety. One of the stark examples of this is Scientology has an organization within that religion, within that cult, that's called the Sea Org. And when you join the Sea Org, you dedicate your life to Scientology and you sign a billion-year contract. A billion-year contract that you will stay true to Scientology through all generations and through all of your lives, and reinstatement of your spiritual body. I mean, you are invested. Check it out. It says, in accordance with the Scientology beliefs, members are expected to return to the Sea Org when they are reborn. The Sea Org's motto is Reviminus, we come back. Members must therefore sign a symbolic billion-year commitment. Members who leave the Sea Org are issued a freeloader's bill, retroactively billing them for any auditing or training they've received. The demands of a cult are so great that it starts to impede on your ability to function as a human being financially, with your focus, with your energy, with your family. The investment that they ask for is beyond what any organization should be asking for that has your best interest in mind or that is healthy for you. How do you protect yourself from this? Well, be realistic about the demands. Can you be healthy and carry on a healthy life with the demands that this group is asking? Also, expect full transparency from any not-for-profit organization that you're giving money to. And finally, pay close attention to any pay-to-play dynamics or promises. Like Scientology, you have to buy books, you have to buy courses, and you basically have to pay them to level up towards heaven. So anybody promising you these kind of returns like salvation, be aware, don't ever participate in pay-to-play mechanisms. All right, my friends, those are the 9 hallmarks of a cult, how we can protect ourselves from them. What did I miss? How else can we make sure that we protect ourselves from any of these pernicious beliefs, these ideas that keep people trapped and take away their freedom of thought? I would love to hear what I missed, what you heard, what stuck out to you, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.